In this demo, we're going to see how to define and use a basic interface in TypeScript. We've already seen a need for a book type in our app, so that's where we'll start. I'll use the interface keyword and create an interface named book. I'll use a code snippet to paste in some properties on it. Right now I'm just giving it the same properties I defined on the object literals I've used so far in the course. Notice that the category property is of type category, which is only available here because I imported it at the top of the file. Now that we have a simple book interface, let's update our code inside app.ts to use it. To make it accessible in other modules, I need to export it from this one just like I exported the category enum. I'll now go back to app.ts. I'll close the sidebar to give myself a little more room and then jump up to the top of the file. To fix the problems I created when I removed the category enum from this file, as well as to make the new book interface available, I'm going to import each of them. The import statement for the enum will be identical to the one I used to make it accessible inside the interfaces file. The import statement for the book interface will be similar. I'm importing book and the relative path will just be /interfaces with no file extension. The first place I want to use the new book interface is on the getAllBooks function here at the top of the file. We know it's meant to return books, but until now we haven't had a book type. To highlight the value of explicitly returning a type, I'm going to remove the ID property from the first object in the array currently being returned. You can see that when I remove that, we don't see any new errors in the editor. As far as TypeScript is concerned, we're currently just returning an array of objects. They are currently of type any, which means every one of them could have different properties. I'll put the ID property back, and now I'll give the function an explicit return type. I'll use the new interface and specify that it should return an array of books. If I again remove the ID property from the first item in the array, we now get an error trying to return the array from the function. I'll hover over the variable with the error. Visual Studio Code is cutting off the error a little bit at the top of my screen, but it says that property ID is missing in type. Since I've explicitly declared that the function should return an array of books, every item in the array must implement the book interface, which means each object must contain all of the properties declared on the interface. I'll get rid of the error by putting the ID property back on the first object. I'll scroll down a bit and again use the book interface as a function return type. The getBookById function will return a single book. Specifying types like this will make sure we use these functions as they were intended to be used. I now want to add a new function, so I'll scroll down a little further to the end of the file. I'm going to name the new function printBook. It will take a single parameter named book that will be of type book. It won't return a value and will just log the title and author of the book that it's passed. Because I've specified a type for the parameter, you can see that I'm getting code completion help inside the function when I use that parameter. Visual Studio Code recognizes all the properties available on the book interface. I'm now going to write some code to call the new function. I'll first declare a new variable named myBook. It will just be an object literal. I'll use a code snippet to paste in some properties for it. Notice that I haven't declared that this variable is of type book, but it has all of the properties defined on the book type. ID, title, author, available, and category. It also has a couple of additional properties, year and copies. I'm going to pass this object to the new printBook function. Notice that I don't get any error messages in the editor. This is an example of TypeScript's duck typing. Even though I didn't explicitly declare that the myBook variable was of type book, it has all of the properties defined on a book, which means I can use it anywhere a book is expected. That's true even though it has a couple of additional properties. I'll run the build task to start the compiler and then press F5 to run the code. We can see that the object was treated as if it had been declared as a book, and we get the expected output in the console. That's duck typing in action. I'll stop the debugger and close the sidebar. I now want to demonstrate optional properties on an interface. I'm going to open the interfaces file in the left editor and app.ts in the right editor so we can immediately see the effect my changes have on the code that uses the book interface. The first change I'm going to make is to add a new property to the interface named Pages. It'll be a number. Notice that as soon as I add it, I get an error trying to pass the myBook variable to the printBook function. PrintBook expects an object that implements the book interface, which now has a property named Pages. The myBook variable doesn't have that property. I'll hover over it, and buried in the error message is a bit of text telling us that property Pages is missing in type. If we want the myBook variable to be treated like a book, it must have all of the required properties defined on a book. I'll change the Pages property to be optional by adding a question mark after the property name. Since the property is now no longer required, the red squiggly line under the myBook variable immediately goes away. Let's now see what happens if I explicitly declare the myBook variable to be of type book. When you constrain a variable to be of a particular type, it's no longer permissible to include extra properties that are not defined on the type. Because the book interface doesn't have a year property, I'm getting an error trying to add it here. I'll delete it, and now I get an error on the copies property, which is also not part of the book interface. I'll go ahead and delete it as well, and now the compiler's happy again. I'll add the new Pages property to this object, and you can see there are no issues with it. Interfaces can also contain method signatures, so let's now add one of them to the book interface. I'm going to add a new method named markDamaged. I'll add a question mark after the name to make it optional, and then I'll provide the function signature. It will take a string parameter named reason and won't return a value. Even though it's optional, I'm going to provide an implementation for it on the myBook variable. I'll assign it an arrow function that just logs the word damaged followed by the reason passed to the function. I'll then call the function on the object and pass it the string missing back cover. I'll run the app again, and you can see I did properly implement the method defined on the interface. The expected output shows up in the console. Let's now talk about defining interfaces for function types.